What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy show with your host, me, Tera Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, September 11th, and we are live. So, welcome to everybody tuning in. We are live all over the place, all across the Player Profiler network, and also on my TikTok channel as well. So, welcome in. We are fresh off week one, and I'm just gonna wax poetically here for a second. That was awful. That week was absolutely awful. Yeah, I do an early waiver wire pickup video for Yahoo that goes out right after the early games. And when I tell you I was stumped on ads trying to figure out what value we could possibly obtain from the early slate, I'm not even joking. It was ugly. I see questions coming in. I see comments coming in. By the way, guys, ask your questions. If I miss them, continue to ask them because we're kind of going to go through the flow of the show here. And we'll be taking questions live. I'll be answering the mailbag questions as well because we are a mailbag show. So you can also submit your questions prior to the show. That would be amazing to me on any social platform. And let's get into it. Just a quick little overview here from the week. I mean, Titans were absolutely tragic. We'll talk about that a little more in detail later. Quarterbacks didn't really give what we thought they were going to give. Jared Goff was disappointing. Guys like Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes, they were okay, but not top 5 that we were expecting from them. Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, oh my God, tragic. Wide receivers were okay, but there were some disappointments there, especially for my boy Drake London. We'll talk about it. The only group that really showed out and showed up was the running backs. I was very proud and impressed of the running back groups as a whole. I mean, they stepped up, showed out, absolutely fantastic. I hope that your week one fantasy matchups were amazing. Comment, let me know how you did. I hope you did fantastic. Let's dive into it. Before we dive into the mailbag questions and some of the live questions as well, I'm going to chat real quick about one key storyline from week one, and it was the Falcons. Yeah. Good Lord. The Falcons, the Atlanta Falcons versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. The matchup was so ugly for both offenses. We kind of expected Pittsburgh's offense wouldn't exactly be pretty. Justin Fields getting the spot start. Well, hopefully he'll be a little bit better this week. Anticipated to start for Russell Wilson. The lack of production from the Falcons, though, that was a wee bit surprising, a wee bit disturbing, really. Kirk Cousins completed 16 of 26 passes for 155 yards and a touchdown. Drake London, my boy, 2 receptions, 15 yards. It was not the wide receiver one opening that I was expecting from him. It was worse than what we got from the Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke era. So, I mean, it was just, I'll take the old Drake London over what we got here with Kirk Cousins. I'm kidding. We don't want to go back that direction. And just a quick note, because I see all of the questions coming in. I'll get to the questions in just a second. I promise. I'm just going to dive into this real quick. But yeah, Drake London, we're concerned. We're highly concerned about what happened. It has to get better. It will get better. Kyle Pitts was the only one that caught the touchdown there from Kirk Cousins, but he only had 3 receptions for 26 yards. So even that was ugly. Still, on top of that, he was one of the better performing tight ends of the week. So good for him. Bijan Robinson was the lone bright spot. But again, it was ugly. It wasn't pretty. 18 carries, 68 yards. That's not what we're expecting there. Receptions kind of got him over the edge. No touchdown. He didn't even produce those RB1 numbers for him that we were looking for. He was outperformed by players like Alexander Mattison, J.K. Dobbins, which, by the way, I'm not criticizing. I'm very happy that J.K. Dobbins has popped back to J.K. Dobbins, and we're hoping that he sustains it for the entire year here. Pro J.K. Dobbins over here, crossing our fingers for him. But for Bijan to get outperformed by J.K. Dobbins in week one, when he hadn't even earned the RB1 role yet, is kind of crazy there. All of the Falcons outside of Ray McLeod, my Clemson boy. You see my Clemson stuff in the background. There we go. All of the Falcons outside of Ray McLeod really underperformed compared to their ADP. Fantasy managers obviously very heavily invested in this offense, myself and one of them with Drake London. And this is a big concern here. But not an like an overly panic situation, because we have to remember that Pittsburgh can be an extremely tough defensive matchup when they're healthy. They were healthy. We have a healthy TJ Watt. You have a healthy secondary. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit difficult for everybody coming in there. And it was an ugly matchup that was a defensive matchup. Atlanta's defense much improved as well. So I wasn't expecting fantastic numbers out of anyone in this game, but I was expecting a lot more than that. So we got to keep our eye on it. Cousins really didn't look like himself. This didn't look like the offense that we thought it was going to be. And it's all just a wee bit confusing. It's possible that lack of preseason, and maybe that's kind of like a theme that we go through when we're talking about all these other positions as well, that lack of preseason was a big factor. You saw the slow start that everyone got off to. This was not just isolated to the Falcons. Passing yardage was down. Passing touchdowns were down compared to previous seasons. So overall, this week one was just a complete disaster for a lot of teams, unfortunately, and kind of leaves you wondering, hey guys, maybe we should get on the field as a team prior to week one, so we don't look like a disjointed team when we finally do get on the field. Just a thought there. Just a thought. Before we dive into some more mailbag questions, we've got a lot of questions in the chat, both over here where I'm live on YouTube, and then we've got questions over on TikTok as well. So I'm going to start answering a whole bunch of those, and then we'll get to some of the mailbag questions as well. Feel free to continue to submit questions as we go through these. We want to make this a very, very question-friendly environment, like a live mailbag show. You're literally just putting it in the mailbox right now and sending it directly to me, and I get to it in a matter of seconds. I love it. So let me go ahead and dive in here. Oh, this is a good question. From Bula, McLaurin, or Williams, you just got to specify which Williams that is. Mike Williams, maybe. We have so many Williams now. I got to get a first name on that one. From Thomas Collins, does Kenneth Walker play? We just had the notification come through. That's very pertinent. Just saw a notification come through that he did not practice today. Although that is not unusual, unfortunately, for Kenneth Walker. It sounds like, speaking wise from him, that it wasn't significant. And remember, it is Wednesday, right? When we get these kind of Wednesday practice reports in, we'll get used to it as we kind of get back into the swing of things. But, practice reports for Tuesday and Wednesday for guys that are playing on Sunday and Monday, not a big deal, honestly. It's a common rest day for people that are dealing with little nagging injuries. So Walker, I do feel like we're teetering towards him being able to play. And yeah, I see the comment there of CMC saying he was fine. So you always got to worry about the speaking that these guys have. Practice reports are really the thing that I like to hone in on. But be prepared. Obviously, Zach Charbonnet is not someone in the majority of leagues that we can go and get off waivers. But if you have him, just kind of keep that in mind, that he could be an option this week as well. But I'm leaning towards Kenneth Walker playing. If he's active, I will absolutely play him. Love what I saw out of him last week. So we'll lean into it if he's active. Got a question here from, most people have Charbonnet. Unfortunately, he's not going to be someone that we can pick up right now. Question from T, DJ Moore. This is a good one. DJ Moore or Malik Nabers, rest of season question. Love a good rest of season question. Rest of season, I still lean towards DJ Moore. And it's a smidge because honestly, in my preseason rankings for draft, they were right next to each other back to back. And I lean aggressively towards Nabers, but did have DJ Moore a little bit higher. Nabers is going to have volume, right? He's the clear wide receiver one in that offense. It's going to be there. But unfortunately, as we saw kind of with Wan'Dale Robinson popping up as the target leader there, if Daniel Jones is the quarterback, we know what he likes to do. He likes to throw short passes over the middle because that's the best thing that he can do. And he also loves to throw pick sixes, but that doesn't really benefit us. Unfortunately, I like Nabers as, someone who's going to be consistently around the wide receiver 2 range. Potentially some boom weeks there, depending on what happens there at quarterback. But DJ Moore is the person that I prefer. It was good to see him get out there and operate as the guy that we kind of see as that wide receiver 1. Although we should note that technically Keenan Allen had the most targets in week 1 Roma Dunze was kind of left out in the cold a little bit. Things can shift as we go on, but just based off where I see that offense heading, I would prefer to have DJ Moore rest of season, especially as we continue to get Caleb Williams developing as well. Question over on YouTube from Tingley: Will Wilson or Wright? Ooh, okay, this is perfect. I'm actually going to jump ahead because this was one of the topics that I wanted to cover with you guys. So live podcast adjustments here because this question is perfect. Play Wilson or Wright if HN plays. And that is the key there because we've got so many scenarios that we have to kind of prepare here for this backfield. So we know Mostert is out. So at least we've got that definitive action. And HN, we've questionable game time decision, doesn't really bode well for Thursday night games. At the same time, we did have some beat reporters come through, looking at him at practice today, saying that he was moving well, which is a good sign. But, again, we have to be cautious with that. So to start right off the bat, because we've got these two different scenarios, if HN is active, we're 100% playing him. So if you have HN and you're wondering like, okay, what do I do if we get reports that he's active but limited? It's still HN. It is a good matchup. Excuse me. It is a good matchup for him. And really in any matchup, he has the ability to pop off even on a limited basis. So you don't want to leave him on the bench after, especially after seeing what we saw in week 1, where he was really treated as the RB1. I thought there might be a little bit more of a split, but there was a clear edge between him and Mostert, and visually as well. He just looked like at another level. Mostert looked a little bit un-Mostert-like maybe age was taking a hold a little bit. But hey, it was the first game of the season. But if he is active, we also have this caveat of deciding, as Tingley was asking, are we playing Wilson or Wright? And I kind of hesitate to play either one of them if HN is active, because if HN is active on a limited basis and he's taking some of those touches, I don't know if whatever is left is going to be enough for either Wilson or Wright, because my assumption would be is that they would both be involved and they might both split carries. And that becomes a problem when you look at the both of them and you say, okay, Wilson, very stable, should have a decent floor if he's playing alongside potentially a limited HN. Wright, on the other hand, if he gets out there, gets some touches, and we saw how he looked in preseason, he fits perfectly into this offense. So let's say he gets out there, gets some touches, and Mike McDaniel, we know who he is. If there's a hot hand, he'll lean towards it. And it would just kind of make Wilson a very risky play. And at the same time, Wright's very risky. I don't particularly want to play either of them, unfortunately, if HN is active, just because more than likely you're going to have more reliable options. So unless you for some reason had Raheem Mostert and you're trying to fill that hole, turn to another direction on that one. I'm very apprehensive to play either one of them if HN is active. I don't know if the volume would be there, and it's Thursday. You don't have to panic on that. Just wait and play somebody else with upside, because their running back, honestly, I'm feeling very comfortable with the guys that are in that kind of 20 to 30 range in my rankings right now. I would prefer to play one of them rather than kind of reaching and taking a chance on Wilson or Wright if HN is active. Now, if HN is out, I actually prefer taking that upside swing of going with Jaylen Wright over Jeff Wilson for the same reason that I was just talking about. When we look at Jaylen Wright and Jeff Wilson in this offense, potentially splitting carries if both Mostert and HN are out, I got to put my money on Wright being the one that stands out there over Wilson. And if he gets the hot hand, again, starts to get a little upside there, that'll be the one that I want to lean into. So I would rather take that risk with Jaylen Wright, just lean on the talent and the opportunity, because especially when you're dealing with, it's not unusual for rookies to be inactive in week 1 just because of, again, personnel and stuff like that. I don't think there's any red flags of him not being active in week 1 and all of a sudden thinking that if he's active in week 2, he won't get the chance to get the bulk of the carries. So just keep that in mind. Jaylen Wright is still a good play if HN is out. Take a couple more questions, and then I'm going to do a little ad break for us here. Yeah, I see those comments there from Ryan Brown, Wright all day, 100%. Yeah, I'm glad you guys agree with me, right? That 4.3 speed, youth size, you got to lean into it. over Jeff Wilson, who is stable. That's fine. But, we're leaning into the young back there, getting the upside and the opportunity here. Trade question over here. Nice. Would you trade Tyreek Hill and Aaron Jones? Ooh. Would you trade Tyreek Hill and Aaron Jones for Jonathan Taylor, T. Higgins, and Devonta Smith? I wouldn't do that. I know it feels like you're upgrading at running back. I will give you that one for sure. I have JT higher. I actually love JT for a big boom week this week. If I could really lean into it and take a risk, man, I think he could have an overall RB1 finish this week against that. You can see my Packers on YouTube. You guys can't see it, but I am wearing my Packers shirt. I'm a Packers fan. And if I know one thing about the Packers, just target the run defense. Whoever's playing them will absolutely go off. But to go from Tyreek Hill to the combination of Higgins and Devonta Smith, it's a downgrade, unfortunately. You've got 2 wide receiver twos, and that's fantastic. But you're just not getting that Tyreek Hill upside out of either one of them. And I love Devonta Smith. I do. T. Higgins makes me a little nervous. I just straight up don't want to roster T. Higgins at any point throughout the season. He'll never be a trade target for me, unfortunately, because, it's so cliche, but I'm sorry. It's the first thing that comes to my head. Your best ability is your availability, unfortunately. And his availability is very much in question all the time. And that is exactly why I have no shares of T. Higgins this year. And I won't make any trades for him, unfortunately. So when I look at that trade, it's really Tyreek Hill to Devonta Smith for me. And I can't do that. It's not enough of an upgrade at running back, especially considering that JT has the issue of Anthony Richardson stealing those touchdowns that kind of nips him there. So no, I prefer the Tyreek Hill, Aaron Jones side. I know it feels like you're getting a lot, but I can't lean into it. From Raven Edits, Walker or Connor? Connor for sure. Walker dealing with the injury. Even if he plays, those two would be very, very close for me in rankings this week. So, do I have my rankings up right now? Let me double check here. See if I can get to them quickly. How good is my internet? We're testing it right now and seeing if I can stall to tell you exactly where I have Kenneth Walker and James Conner. I already have James Conner ahead of Kenneth Walker this week. Again, injury has part to do with that, and then matchup as well. I like James Conner's matchup against the LA Rams much better than I like Kenneth Walker's matchup against New England, whose defense is looking a lot, like it's continuing down the same path of previous years. We underestimated how good they could be. From I Love You, I have Pacheco RB1, J.K. Dobbins RB2. Should I put forward as flex? Yeah, 100% okay with that. I love what we saw. I was very happy with what we saw out of Jerome Ford this week. I think it's perfectly fine to play him as a flex play this week. Borderline, and Jacksonville is kind of interesting in terms of their defense. It did look a lot better, a lot more improved than it was last year. But with that said, I still think it's a decent matchup for Jerome Ford. They got to lean on the run since Deshaun Watson has been struggling. So yeah. Jumping back to questions over there. Should I trade CeeDee and Chubb? CeeDee and Chubb for Gibbs and Keenan. Oh, Abhai, that is a tricky question there. That's a tricky question there because we can't really trust Chubb, right? So you're looking to offload him, upgrade at running back massively to Gibbs. At the same time, going to Keenan Allen, that's another one that is unfortunately a risk. If you're desperate at running back and you're fine, like let's say you made all the right moves at wide receiver and, CeeDee is obviously your wide receiver 1, but you're deep at wide receiver and you have somebody that can be a borderline fill-in for that wide receiver 1 role. So you're not going to be slacking there. Then yeah, I can do that if you really, really need to get somebody at running back. But man, I would want something a little bit better than Keenan Allen, unfortunately, because I don't think that he's in the context of that Chicago offense, unfortunately, and playing alongside DJ Moore with the possibility of Rome Odunze coming up in the latter half of the year. That's just a whole lot of risk, and you are significantly downgrading at wide receiver there. So just keep that in mind. Couple more questions here from GDLT. Olave and London, which one to keep and which one to trade away? If you can, now this sucks because obviously both of them are coming off of terrible weeks here. I would keep London. And I know that feels funny considering what we saw out of Kirk Cousins and the worry there. But if it really is a concern about Kirk Cousins' health, we do have Michael Penix as the backup there. My problem with Olave and why Olave would be the one that I would trade away. Olave is someone who I don't think I have any shares of other than Dynasty. I do have him in Dynasty. My problem with Olave is that he has a capped ceiling and he is not capable in the context of this offense of reaching a top 12 receiver. If things turn around, if Kirk Cousins becomes Kirk Cousins and, he gets more comfortable playing on that Achilles, or maybe they turn over and switch over to Michael Penix and he's fantastic, love Penix, London would still have that wide receiver one upside. Unfortunately, Olave doesn't have that. So if I'm looking to trade one of them, I think you probably can get better value out of Olave. And that's probably the one that I would want to trade away between the two. All right. We're going to take a short break here for a quick ad. So we'll be back in just 1 minute. Don't go anywhere. And we will hear a word from our sponsors.
DFS getting harder every year, but we're here to make it easier with the DFS Dominator, because I know a lot of optimizers keep coming out. Oh, our optimizer. What about this optimizer? But that optimizer. Well, we have a cash game optimizer that leverages the projections from Dario, Billy, the award-winning projections at PlayerProfiler.com, and builds the best lineups for cash games that have both upside and stability, because that's what you want. It's a couple clicks, boom, boom, boom. You get the best possible lineup for your cash games. But for tournaments, traditional optimizers don't work. That's why we have a lineup genius, which takes you through the process of building lineups the way they should be built. Which quarterbacks do you want to be overweight on? Then building stacks, then setting run backs, then optimizing, and generating up to 150 lineups that you can easily import into DraftKings, into FanDuel. That's the DFS Dominator. It's only $45 a year, not a week, a year. Just go to Player Profiler, click on the DFS Dominator from the menu, and you won't be sorry.
And no overcooks.
DFS getting harder.
All right. We are back over here. Thank you, guys. Let's go ahead and dive into some more questions over here. From Senior Football. Start one flex in non-PPR. Aaron Jones, Jerome Ford, Brian Robinson, Jaylen Waddle, Devonta Smith, or Brandon Ayuk. That is quite the group. And it's non-PPR, so that does throw a little bit of a wrinkle into it. But still in that, Devonta Smith is my highest ranked in that one. Even in non-PPR. Expect a little bit of a bounce back week for it. Philadelphia was okay last week, but obviously all those touchdowns getting eaten up by Saquon Barkley was a little bit of a bummer, but Devonta Smith is still the one that I have the highest ranked over there. I'm going to do a couple of mailbag questions here because it's only fair to the people that submitted them early. Question from... I practiced this name ahead of time and I thought I had it. And now that I look at it live, I realize that I don't. Question from C. Yofuera Tipstay. I think that's it. Kelsey or Kincaid. We talked about the massive issues we've got some tight end questions here that came in. A lot of tight end questions because we talked about earlier in the show how tight end as a whole just massively underperformed. And Kelsey and Kincaid were absolutely two of those people. Different underperforming. Kelsey still put up some numbers a little bit in a difficult defensive matchup. Kincaid, on the other hand, good God, that was frightening. Kelsey is absolutely the one that I would start over Kincaid. And it's not even the bias towards the performance from last week. Heading into the season, Kelsey was still my tight end two behind Sam Laporta. Kincaid was actually someone that was my tier break from that first tier. So I had the guys in the first tier, and then my second tier started off with Kincaid. And the reason why I didn't include him in that first tier, as opposed to a lot of other fantasy analysts who did, was that I was always kind of concerned that we were anointing him as the target leader of this Bills offense. And we might be underestimating that this is going to be a very flat contribution from everybody. And right off the bat, we saw that Keon Coleman was immediately involved with a decent amount of targets. Khalil Shakir, obviously, we expected him to be involved. I know some people didn't really think that Coleman would really get decent play to start off the season, but it's very clear they consider him an integral part of this offense, and he's going to develop more over time, and Josh Allen's going to continue to look for him. We also had Curtis Samuel there, who was a little bit underwhelming, but he was, dealing with that injury. And then we also have the presence of Dawson Knox, who on his own is never going to be someone who has standalone value, unfortunately, because the volume won't be there and we can't really rely on him. But his existence is just enough to kind of pull away from Dalton Kincaid. So I am a little bit worried about Kincaid in terms of where he was being drafted. I don't know if that value is going to pay off. Now, it's week 1. We don't panic because obviously things are not going to look the same on a week-to-week basis as this team starts to find its identity. Right now, it's just a lot of Josh Allen. And that makes sense because he is the central focus point of that offense. He can be everything in this offense. But I kind of see moving forward that if everything in terms of targets remains very flat, kind of similar to the way that it was at the end of last season when the numbers came down for Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, I do get a wee bit concerned there. And so Kincaid, he's dropped in my rankings here. We're still starting him, but over a guy like Kelsey, no. Start Kelsey because we know for sure Kelsey is getting targets. He's going to catch them. At the very least, you've got a decent little baseline there for Kelsey, even if maybe his ceiling is limited with the presence of guys like Worthy and Rashee Rice popping through. This Kansas City receiving core, massively underrated there. But Kelsey is the one that we would start. We have another Kincaid question here from @Paul St. Clair. Taysom Hill is Kincaid is my starter. Taysom Hill is my backup. Should I drop Taysom for Parkinson's? This is a really good question here because if you're looking for a starter right now, which some of us are, maybe you have David Njoku, maybe you have Jake Ferguson, raise my hand on that one. I'm patiently kind of waiting here on Jake Ferguson to make a last minute move on tight end. If you have one of these guys that are dealing with an injury or maybe they just aren't the guy that we thought they were, if you want to go out and get somebody who is going to see targets, it's, Colby Parkinson is a guy that can offer you a very steady, solid fill-in, a reliable little floor. He doesn't have that upside, though, in my opinion. And Tyler Higbee's upside was always kind of capped. So it's really kind of the role here. Everything more than likely is going to go through Cooper Kupp. It's going to be ridiculous. The offensive line for the Rams is dealing with injury, which kind of also bodes well for things going aggressively towards Kupp. Demarcus Robinson, if you know, is one of my guys as well. Like what we saw out of Tyler Johnson. So the ceiling a little bit capped for Parkinson, but he is someone who is going to be a steady presence within the offense, very reliable. But unless you're looking to start, you need somebody to start right now. Your tight end is injured. I would kind of veer away from that one. Keep Taysom Hill for in this instance for the backup to Kincaid, just because you can roster the high upside option versus the steady floor guy. Especially because Buffalo's bye week is not until week 12. So you would just have Parkinson sitting on your bench right there by week 12. Maybe at some point we see Tyler Higbee come back if the Rams are competitive. So just kind of keep that in mind right there, specifically in that situation. We like Colby, but in this question for this user or fantasy manager, we're sticking with Taysom Hill as your backup. Let's do one more tight end question here. Likely or Andrews in week 2? I love this question because it's pushing our limits right here in terms of ignoring what Likely did last week, which was absolutely insane. I have Likely. I did not draft Likely in redraft reference, but I've got Likely on 2 of my dynasty teams. I actually had him in a taxi squad, which is a taxi squad that allows multiple year stays. And it was very perplexing seeing 30 in that format, 30 points on my fantasy in my taxi squad. Yeah, that was wild. Isaiah Likely, I am a believer in him. And I do believe that he is going to be a constant presence within this offense. But the problem here with Isaiah Likely is that, and not a problem with him, but compared to Mark Andrews, he's not going to make Mark Andrews disappear. Now, maybe at some point, maybe the Ravens say they can get some trade value and trade Mark Andrews. I don't think that that's going to be the case at any point. But from my perspective, I think they will both be very utilized in this offense for the remainder of the season. And Mark Andrews is somebody who we can't just bench right now. Now, if we get this again where Mark Andrews gets nothing and it's a whole bunch of Isaiah Likely, then yeah, 100% we can take that risk and say, okay, we need to reevaluate here. But last week was a week where, Andrews saw a lot of double coverage. As teams start to see that they can't just do that and leave Isaiah Likely, unchecked. He's just not that kind of player that you can just say, forget about him. He's not going to catch the ball. We're probably going to see a little bit of a shift here to where they're playing Andrews a little bit more honest. So expect Mark Andrews to have a nice little bounce back week here and still be involved. We're not panicking on him yet. We're still starting Andrews over Likely by a smidge. It's like a smidge here too, because Likely is a top 12 tight end for me this week. So he's absolutely a starter, but you still need to keep Andrews in your lineup. Still need to keep Andrews in your lineup. We need to see it 2 weeks in a row before we start to say, okay, this is something significant and the Ravens have adjusted their offense. I don't think that's the case. I just think that they like Likely as an additional pass catcher there. So we've got Zay, Mark Andrews, and then Isaiah Likely is, I think, the person who they want to see is that top 3 option, like Rashad Bateman, but I just don't know if that is really the future for him, especially with the way that we've seen Likely perform. Before I do any more mailbag questions, I'm going to drop over and answer some additional questions from the chat because we have got a ton. By the way, if I miss your question, feel free to answer it again because they're all, you guys are asking a ton, thankfully, over here on both platforms. I'm going to get this question over here by Mark Cleveland. Trade Brian Robinson for Mahomes. You have Hall and Mason left. And now Hall, Jacobs, and Mason left. Interesting. So you are stacked at running back. You could spare Brian Robinson. You do need a couple more guys on your bench that you can rely on. But yeah, if you want to make that, let's say maybe you drafted Tua and you're a little bit where you don't have somebody that's stable, high upside. You want to upgrade at quarterback. I think that's a fair trade. I could make that trade. I know it feels weird getting rid of Brian Robinson, but you do have 2 solid RB1s over there. Josh Jacobs, we're a little bit worried about here. So just keep that in mind that we're going to be worried about him over the next couple of weeks while Jordan Love is out. Because I have no faith in Malik Willis, unfortunately. And so the best way for defenses to attack the Packers is going to just say, hey, we're going to stop the run. Malik, you got to throw on us. And I don't think that's going to end up very well. He could prove me wrong. He could. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I love this question over here from Luis on TikTok. Does Brian Thomas keep this up? If you follow me, any of my preseason stuff, I really, really came around to Brian Thomas as being one of my favorite value picks for the draft during preseason. I was a little bit worried about him and seeing Christian Kirk, hoping that Christian Kirk was going to be the lead wide receiver 1 in this offense. But as we kind of work through preseason, the more that I look at Brian Thomas, the more that I say, man, not only is this a 1-for-1 replacement of Calvin Ridley, I think, he could very well be at a level slightly above that. And that's a lot considering the level of prospect that Calvin Ridley was. Man, I think he keeps it up. I really do. I've moved him up again. I know I had him ranked higher last week, but I've moved him up even more this week. You just kind of have to. I think he's going to operate as the wide receiver 1 of that offense. And please keep in mind that the production that he put out last week, which was fairly wasn't mind blowing, but was very good. That was with Trevor Lawrence having an arguably very bad day. It was not a good day for Trevor Lawrence, my boy. It wasn't a struggle day for him, but it wasn't a high volume day, not the high volume that I would expect for him to have in a matchup against Miami. That one was a little bit, that one deceived me a little bit right there, that matchup. So I think that we'll see better volume from Trevor Lawrence. And as volume increases for Trevor Lawrence, I think that, big beneficiary there is Brian Thomas. It's kind of interesting when we look at the snap count for those Jags receivers. Gabe Davis was the one with the highest percent snap count, above 90%. Theoretically, that makes sense. Now, not always is the guy that's on the field the most going to see the most amount of targets. Gabe being a guy that they keep on the field constantly just kind of makes sense in terms of their scheme. And then the guy that had the next highest snap count was Brian Thomas. You're talking about a guy who was already immediately kind of considered the wide receiver one of this offense. He is a mainstay. He's not having to fight for snaps. He's got targets. He's got that high upside. He is a red zone target. I think it's just going to continue to get better and better for him. Seeing this out of him in week 1 against, a decent Miami defense in terms of their secondary, I was very, very encouraged for him. And I'm actually going to transition over to a comment over here by Tingley on the same exact topic of start Brian Thomas or Christian Kirk in PPR or play both. I've already moved Thomas up above Christian Kirk in my rankings. I prefer to start him, and I'm fading Christian Kirk this week, unfortunately. I'm actually in the process of making a make or break article, and Christian Kirk is, spoiler alert, Christian Kirk is going to be one of those guys, unfortunately, that is a break for me this week. To see him be the guy that was on, and it wasn't dramatic, but to see him be the guy that was on the field the least here, and also anticipating that we're going to see a little uptick in targets for Evan Ingram, who was disappointing last week. I'm a little bit worried about Christian Kirk in this offense. I don't know I don't think they see him as the alpha in this offense, unfortunately, and he's going to take a back seat. I prefer to start Brian Thomas. I already trust him. Even in PPR, I already trust him. So we're leaning into Brian Thomas. Yeah, I'm glad to see the chat agrees. Get some likes over here if you agree. Brian Thomas over Christian Kirk. Give me some likes. From Jelly of the Month, drop Josh Downs. Oh, God, this is a good question. Drop Josh Downs for Demarcus Robinson, Justice Hill, or Tank Bigsby in PPR. We'll bench the player. Yeah, I would. And I like Josh Downs, and it'll be interesting to see how his presence returning to the offense affects Adonai Mitchell, obviously Michael Pittman, and Alec Pierce is probably the one that gets affected the most there with Josh Downs returning. But I would far prefer to say I'd rather have Demarcus Robinson. Then my second choice would be Tank Bigsby. I guess it might be more so preference in terms of what you need to fill your bench. If you need, maybe you swung and missed on backup running backs there, and you need to invest in a solid backup running back with maybe some standalone value, I would probably prioritize Tank Bigsby. So drop Josh Downs for Tank Bigsby. And then my second priority on that would be Demarcus Robinson. Justice Hill, I feel like, is one of those guys who's going to go, off and on waivers as we kind of progress through the season, as people kind of have a love-hate relationship with him. In games where the Ravens play from behind, he'll have solid production. In games where Ravens are ahead, you'll see a lot more Derrick Henry. So just kind of keep that in mind with Justice Hill. So we're prioritizing Tank Bigsby, Demarcus Robinson, and then Justice Hill. Water break here. My voice kind of. I am your favorite perpetually coffee and ill fantasy analyst out there. Yeah. Another question here I see from Justin Santiago. DJ Moore, Malik Nabers, or Drake London. This week, for sure, it is going to be DJ Moore. DJ Moore is the guy that we're starting. We've got Rome Odunze. We don't know at this point if Rome Odunze is going to play or not, but not a big factor there regardless. Just his target share was a little bit low. But if he's out, we've also got Keenan Allen dealing with a heel injury, which I anticipate he'll play through because he was already dealing with that heel injury prior to week 1. But in my opinion, DJ Moore is the one that we want to lean into, especially if those guys are dealing with injuries. Malik Nabers, steady, but potentially not a lot of upside there. And Drake London is very risky this week. I would far prefer to go with DJ Moore over him. From Derek. Oh, that was just question from Derek. Yeah, likely Mark Andrews. This good comment there. Likely Mark Andrews, the new Gronk and Aaron Hernandez. It's very possible. I feel like we're always looking for that special combination of two tight ends that can be productive from a fantasy perspective. We're always looking to see it. It never ever works out in our favor. Could Likely and Mark Andrews finally be the two that make that happen for us? Maybe. I can see it because they're both so talented. And I just don't see how you can put a talent this was my opinion last year. I just don't see how you can put a talent like Likely on the bench. He's a guy that you have to have out there. Absolutely. Jump over here and do some questions over here on TikTok as well. Ooh, let's see. I have Kyron and Stafford. Should I start Matt Stafford over Dak because my opponent has Cup? Ooh. That's a very good question. Dak, I am mildly concerned. I don't have a warm, fuzzy feeling about Dak this week because I'm not a big fan of the matchup. I would still start Stafford. I know it feels like you should just do a little bit of gamesmanship and go with Dak. But still, Stafford is probably just slightly higher upside here. No, you kind of got me on this one. Actually, I changed my mind on that. I'm reversing course mid-thought here. Go with Dak. Go with Dak over Stafford. More questions here. Oh, this is a good one. From Tim Clusion. McLaughlin or Bigsby off the waiver wire. I feel like I had this question somewhere else, and it's Bigsby that I would prefer to get off the waiver wire. This actually might be a mailbag question now that I think about it. Let me double check and see if this was a mailbag question. I swear it was, and I can't find it now. And now I'm mad at myself for not being able to find that mailbag question. I'm like 99% sure that it was. And I prefer Bigsby 100% over McLaughlin. And let me explain the reason why, because it might seem a little counterintuitive here. I do think that McLaughlin, and I was worried about this. I'm surprised that it didn't happen last year. Not shocked at all that it's happening immediately here in week 1. McLaughlin taking over that lead back role from Javonte Williams was kind of bound to happen there. The problem that I see here with McLaughlin, even if he takes over as the RB1 in this backfield, is that Javonte Williams is not going to be completely replaced. He's still going to be there. He's not going to go away. So if you've got these two guys that are in this committee backfield in a very I don't want to call it a low budget offense, but let's say low production offense that is finding itself with Bo Nix. Bo Nix has got to find himself this season, right? The Broncos offense is not going to be very pretty as he's navigating becoming an NFL quarterback. So goal line opportunities are not going to be very high. Defenses are really going to be honing in on stopping the run and saying, let's make Bo Nix beat us. We don't have to really make a massive effort there. And if that's the case, and we've got this committee, how much upside does Jaleel McLaughlin actually have in this offense? That's the problem. Now take Bigsby in the Jags offense. We know the level of upside that you can have in that offense from a running back perspective. And if he can, develop this kind of standalone mild value next to Travis Etienne, and we know that the Jaguars have kind of been wanting somebody else to step up and take off some of that workload off of Travis Etienne. Tank looks miles better than he did last season. You can see the development in him. You could see it during preseason. You could see it during week 1. And if he can earn that role and provides a little bit of standalone value, but really the kicker there, RB1 upside, if Travis Etienne were to go down with an injury, I would rather have Tank Bigsby on my bench for the upside of what happens if something happens to Travis Etienne, rather than having that steady, 8 to 10 fantasy points potentially from the Broncos backfield that you would get out of Jaleel McLaughlin. Now I remember why I was thinking of Jaleel McLaughlin. Jaleel McLaughlin is also going to be in my make or break column this week. Lots of spoiler alerts here. I think you can already see which direction I am going there with Jaleel McLaughlin, unfortunately. Let's take some more questions here, and then we'll dive into some more mailbag questions. I'll do this one quickly from Tigley because we talked about it a little bit earlier. And kind of keeping us on that tight end trend here. Should I start both Andrews and Likely? And your flex options are Christian Kirk, Palmer, and Dolphins handcuffs because you had Mostert. I like your thought process here. I'm okay with doing that. We've already talked about Christian Kirk being a fade this week. Josh Palmer is also one that now Palmer could have a bounce back week here. He could. This is a very good matchup. I like Ladd McConkey in this matchup. I like Justin Herbert to have maybe a higher production outing in this matchup as well. But my problem is that Ladd immediately kind of stepped in as that wide receiver one role. We were underwhelmed by the production that we got out of Josh Palmer. So yeah, I would prefer to start both Likely and Andrews rather than risking Palmer giving us a dud game. With Likely and Andrews, one of them is going to be that 1A, 1B target with Zay Flowers. So you kind of get you're locking yourself. It's not a bad strategy because we know the level of volume that goes to the tight end position. It's just a matter of who it's actually going towards. So you don't have to kind of do that guesswork. You've got both of them. Just go ahead and start them because both of them are better options than your handcuffs. The only way that I would kind of not go that direction is if Achane was out, and then one of the Dolphins handcuffs would be a higher value option. Jaylen Wright in particular. But I don't think that's going to happen. So for right now, just plan Andrews and Likely for sure. From Jackson Kowalski, would I trade away Justin Jefferson for Rashee Rice and Sam Laporta? Oh, that's a good question. I would do that. I would. And I love Justin Jefferson, and I'm not fading Justin Jefferson. And Sam Darnold looked very competent this week. He looked competent this week against the Giants. Just like I feel like we got to keep ourselves in check here in terms of how Sam Darnold looked. It was an excellent matchup for him to look good. Rashee Rice, I don't feel like we any longer have that risk of him getting the suspension. So trading to get Laporta, who was maybe the lone tight end one that actually kind of sort of pulled through, not to Sam Laporta level that we expect, but it was decent enough to keep us happy and feeling decent about ourselves. And there are higher upside days to come for him. I would expect a lot more out of Laporta. Yeah, I would make that trade. Yeah, I would prefer. I have faith in Laporta and Rashee Rice. I would do that. Let's do some more questions over here. Oh, I would not do this. From Packers Card Exchange. Shout out to, I assume you're my fellow Packers fan there. You got a trade. They get Aaron Jones and you get Likely. I would not do that. Unless even if you were destitute at tight end, I can't do that. Unfortunately, Aaron Jones is somebody who, when he's healthy, he is an RB1. He gives you high upside. It's just a matter of, do we trust him to remain healthy throughout the entire season? But at the same time, you have a level of trust that we don't know with Isaiah Likely right now. So you make that trade and you get rid of Aaron Jones. My God, what if he ends up being healthy for the majority of the season? You absolutely lost that trade. I can't do that, unfortunately. Aaron Jones is someone that I would want to keep. Start two from David. Start two, Derrick Henry, Brian Robinson Jr., Achane, J.K. Dobbins. Well, right off the bat, you have a good situation where if they come out and say, tomorrow, Achane is good, he's 100% workload, and he actually does, and we don't get a Christian McCaffrey. It's a Thursday night game, so you don't have to worry about that at all. But if for some reason that happens, then you can go with Achane and Derrick Henry. If that doesn't happen and we're getting a little bit of ambiguity, he may be limited. Forgo Achane 100%. You don't have to do that risk. You don't, because you have the running backs to be able to say, I'm just going to bench Achane this week and not risk my fantasy lineup. For you, I would go with Derrick Henry and J.K. Dobbins. Good question. I like that. I like that at least Achane is on a Thursday. When we get those injuries on Monday night games, it's a nightmare. But Thursday night games, we can work around it, right? We've got the information ahead of time. We can make contingency plans. We don't have to worry about stuff. So, yeah, I like that. Let's see there. I like the comments in the chat regarding Isaiah Likely. Love all of that. If I miss your question, feel free to ask it again. I try to scroll up, but then sometimes I get a little bit lost. I'm going to do a couple of mailbag questions here while we're on the subject of tight ends. Which, by the way, top 5 tight ends in half PPR this week. We know the one that was first, right? Isaiah Likely. That was easy. You know who was tight end 2 this week? It was Foster Moreau. Foster Moreau, tight end 2 this week. Good for him, coming off of the cancer, right? Surprising that happened. Just goes to show you that, good Lord, you should target anyone and everyone that is playing against Carolina. Keep that in mind. Your quarterbacks, your wide receiver, Derek Carr going off. 3 touchdowns. Everyone and anyone against Carolina, just go ahead and start it and feel confident in it. Tight end 3 on the week and half PPR, Kyle Pitts off of the struggle week, still pulled through with the touchdown, Juwan Johnson. So we had 2 Saints tight ends in the top 5 in half PPR. That is wild. Again, absolutely wild and unfair for Olave, who did not get to participate in the Carolina carnage for the Saints, unfortunately. But Juwan Johnson at number 4. And then Brock Bowers at number 5. I will admit, I was a little bit hesitant to. I had to start Brock Bowers in a league because that's my Dynasty tight end. The one that that was my best option. It paid off. But Brock Bowers, I was a little bit worried about heading into week 1, just because he had been dealing with the injury. Was a little bit concerned in terms of thinking maybe they'll ease him in, maybe they'll limit him a little bit. Fantastic to see him right off the bat with the heavy utilization. Means sky's the limit for him. So super happy about what we saw out of Brock Bowers. But we'll do one more tight end mailbag question from Dark Empire 2014. Please help with tight end landscape recommendations. I love this question because it's not a start sit specific one, just recommendations in general for tight ends. Don't panic. Don't make a panic trade. Like we were talking about, we had one question over here, Aaron Jones for Isaiah Likely. To me, while I do believe in Isaiah Likely, the upside ultimately lies with Aaron Jones as an RB1. So I consider that one kind of like a reactionary trade at tight end. Don't panic. Tight end has always been about, if you've got, one of these guys, if you've got Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, even we talked about, Dalton Kincaid, we talked about earlier. If Evan Ingram, one that kind of, disappointed us as well. Kittle was underwhelming. Good God. They were what a week. Tight end, don't panic. Tight end has always been about positional edge, but you cannot get the positional edge of getting one of these guys if you're giving up another high-end player at another position that is giving you more fantasy value. Just be patient. They all underperformed. It was a weird week as a whole. Passing yardage we talked about earlier in the live was absolutely horrific. Touchdowns were horrific as well. And if you kind of think about it, like just conceptually, if you think about it, if passing yardage and touchdowns are down as a whole, what position would suffer the most? It would be tight end because they've already got so little of the pie. So if everything is coming down, we're just going to notice it a lot more with tight end because it's going to stick out as a sore thumb because all of a sudden they're all going to have like 5-6 fantasy points, unfortunately, and just have extremely low production because it's already a low production position. So I think as we kind of get more comfortable here, as we move into week 2, 3, 4, and passing as a whole just kind of bounces back, we'll see these guys get back to their normal status here. So don't panic regarding these guys here that, we know are tight end ones. We know that they are integral parts of their offenses. Relax. Don't overreact. if you're in a deep situation, like if you've got one of the injured tight ends, Jake Ferguson, David Njoku, then you can be a little bit reactionary here. Not in trade value. Don't panic over there and trade and overdo it to get one. Hit the waiver wire. We talked about Colby Parkinson and his reliability, the steady production that he'll see. We know that Puka Nacua is on IR. He is going to potentially be out longer than what he is in terms of being on IR, unfortunately. We got that update that it's possible that his absence will extend past IR. So keep that in mind, which would not be unusual for the Rams. We've seen it before. So Colby Parkinson, if you got a dire tight end situation, don't be too ashamed to go and pick up Colby Parkinson. Just do it. Puka Nacua is out. We already saw decent production out of him. So he'll see a little uptick in volume there. So that's an option that you can turn to. But other than that, just like we're chilling, we're relaxing over here on this situation because it is a little terrifying. But we're not going to panic and we're not going to lose our minds over it. All right, here. Let's go over to do some live questions here. I apologize to people who submitted their mailbag. I clearly at some point in my notes deleted a portion of the mailbag questions, and I apologize because I know specifically there were some good ones in there that were submitted. So I will go back onto Twitter and answer them all directly because I don't know what happened. Those things just straight up disappeared from my notes as I was getting ready here for the show. So let's answer some more questions before we close things out. We got about 5 more minutes here. And the chat has been very, very live. Question from Jimmy Williams. I like this one. Your opinion on the Titans backfield was the touches/usage in week 1 a true picture or a mirage? I think the touches were a bit of a mirage. What I don't think was a mirage was how good Tony Pollard looked. We saw it in preseason that he looked excellent. He had like the longest run that he had. I wish I had the stat in front of me, but we hadn't seen Tony Pollard have a 20-plus yard run in a long, long time. He just didn't have that burst last year coming off of the injury. He looked fantastic preseason. He proved in week 1 that he still has it. He looks great. So where I see this Titans backfield, they should remain run heavy. Will Levis, I hope better for Will Levis, but the best the best strategy moving forward for the Titans, as I kind of thought would be the strategy for the season as a whole, is for them to rely on the ground. That said, I still think Ridley will get his, so don't kind of panic over that. But I think we'll see enough volume, especially in terms of pass catching upside that both of these guys offer, for them to be weekly starts. So I think we'll see a little bit more Tajay Spears this week, not just limited to the passing game, a little bit more of him on the ground. And I think we'll still see enough out of Pollard to where I don't feel scared. So I think it's a little bit of a mirage in terms of the true picture, but Pollard did look fantastic. That part of it I do think is real. From Rahi. Would you trade DJ Moore and Ford for Marvin Harrison Jr. and Khalil Shakir in full PPR? Other wide receivers are Amon-Ra St. Brown, Rashee Rice, Deontay Johnson, and Josh Palmer. Running backs are Henry, Jacobs, Ford, Bucky, Madison, and McLaughlin. So you technically don't need Jerome Ford. That's interesting because I have a side note. Bucky Irving is someone that I've got a lot of affinity for in that Bucs offense. If that was another one, now technically I think he might have been kind of scooped up on waivers, but if for some reason Bucky Irving is out there, we talked about, people that were looking to pick up Tank Bigsby or something like that, trying to figure out, where you're leaning towards in those handcuff wide receivers that are on waiver wire right now. Bucky Irving is one that I really, really like if he's out there. I think the standalone value is absolutely for real. So kind of side note on that, if you've got Bucky Irving, I think you've got a solid running back on your bench. So for you, Rahi, I would take a risk and make this trade. DJ Moore, I'm okay with making this trade right here. From Derek Lincoln, let's see. Oh, that's interesting. Derek Lincoln traded Bowers for Likely in Dynasty last week. Very interesting. Because I know we've got a lot of thoughts around the possibility of Mark Andrews at some point being out of Baltimore. It's a reality, right? And if they've got Likely, his value could greatly increase there. So I don't hate that. Questions. Let's take a few other questions here. Jumping over to TikTok. Pitts or Ingram from Cyril21. Pitts right now, honestly. Ingram, I do think he'll bounce back a little bit here, but I was happy to see the involvement that we saw out of Pitts. I was happy to see him get the touchdown. I trust Pitts a little bit more than Ingram at this point. It's kind of sticking to the kind of same concept that we had heading into the season as well. So I would start Pitts over Evan Ingram. Let's see. Who should I start? Zamir. Oh, who should I start? Zamir White or Alexander Madison? I feel like that. No, I was going to say that's like a $10,000 question, but technically speaking, from that Raiders offense, it might be like a $10 question. Unfortunately, I don't feel comfortable with Zamir White, and the fact that they said they're going with the hot hand. I mean, that's basically just kind of admitting that you don't have any loyalty to him, and it very well could be Alexander Madison. I don't trust Alexander Madison. We saw last year the struggle was real with him. For right now, I still lean slightly towards Zamir White over Alexander Madison, but man, I don't particularly like either of them, unfortunately. Oh, good question from Derek. Pickens or Kirk this week? Pickens has an awful matchup. We saw, Pickens is playing against, will more than likely be seeing the vast majority of Patrick Surtain this week. And we saw exactly what that did to not DJ Moore. My D's are getting, not DJ, DK. We saw what that did to DK Metcalf last week. So Pickens is one that I'm a little bit fearful for this week, unfortunately. That said, I would still start Pickens over him, even though the matchup is very concerning. Let's talk about CMC for a second, because we got a question here about should we be concerned for Christian McCaffrey? Yes, we absolutely should. The problem is that San Francisco is too good. Like if this was Christian McCaffrey on, I'm going to pick on the Packers. But if this was Christian McCaffrey, obviously I don't, but if this was Christian McCaffrey on the Packers, and I guess the expectation would be that you're a team that you can't just kind of lock down and say, okay, we're going to get the win without Christian McCaffrey. It's okay. We can sub somebody in. Our system works for literally any running back. It doesn't matter. It's just going to continue as is. We feel super confident in Jordan Mason. That's how San Francisco feels. Other teams, I could see where Christian McCaffrey would come back a little bit sooner because they can't risk being without him and losing games and kind of struggling or limping into the playoffs because they weren't able to win those games early on because they sat their running back. So you're saving him up for absolutely nothing. San Francisco, unfortunately, can sit him and win. And so I get worried that we are going to see him kind of miss not only this week, but maybe a couple more weeks until they feel 100% comfortable with him coming back. Because the problem is that they can win without him. And, the longer they can win without him, the more they can sit him and rest him up. And we should be concerned. That's why I was okay with you going out and spending a decent amount of fab on Jordan Mason, because this could be a multi-week absence. And anytime that it maybe pops up, unfortunately, like maybe he kind of tweaks the injury a little bit, or maybe he feels a little sore, I don't think they'll hesitate to start him, unfortunately. So yeah, I hate that. On the topic of CMC, we have a question here from Rinden Dai. I have CMC. I want to trade him. What's his trade value? Should I try to get him for like Garrett Wilson or Achane? I would not for Achane because I feel like the injury risk is kind of similar. They're kind of like two sides to the same coin, except we know for sure that CMC can make it through an entire season as an RB1, as the overall RB1. We don't know that for sure, unfortunately, out of Achane. So I would not see that as an upgrade just because Achane is already dealing with an injury and he's had issues with injuries in the past. So I wouldn't. Garrett Wilson, if you're trading CMC for another position, like wide receiver, it would need to be wide receiver. I would upgrade higher than Garrett Wilson, to be honest. I'm looking for somebody that's in a higher tier. I'm looking at an AJ Brown. That's what I would want to bite on. I would want an AJ Brown. I would want to buy a dip on maybe an Amon-Ra St. Brown. I would want a CeeDee Lamb. If I'm trading Christian McCaffrey, I need to be getting somebody who is a round one for sure, stable pick. And while I love Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers is a concern, right? Health of Aaron Rodgers is a concern, but also the fact that Aaron Rodgers spreads the ball around, and we may not see hyper targeting of Garrett Wilson like we've seen in the past. I would not make that trade for Garrett Wilson, and I would not for HN. If you want to trade him, I would aim higher at wide receiver for sure. I would aim higher. Let's see. One more question. Yeah, we went a little bit over on time here, but that's okay. One more question here. J.K. Dobbins or Kenneth Walker? We are going for right now. Plan to start J.K. Dobbins, but if Kenneth Walker is healthy and cleared and there's no problem with him, I would start Kenneth Walker. But just kind of monitor right there and make sure that you're monitoring that status. We'll do one more question here from Ginger Redman. I saw that one pop up. Kupp or Marvin Harrison? Not even close. We're going Cooper Kupp. 100% sure. There's going to be hyper targeting here. Oh my gosh, they're going to end my live. There's going to be hyper targeting here. 100% towards Cooper Kupp, and it's not even close. I feel like I need to explain that a little bit more, but Marvin Harrison Jr., we cannot trust him. We're still starting him as a flex right now, but we absolutely cannot trust him to the level that we can for a guy like Cooper Kupp, who is healthy, who is the number one target in his offense, and who is in a situation where the Rams' offensive line is, for lack of a better word, kind of sucky right now, which means that when the Rams offensive line sucks in the past, we have seen Matt Stafford aggressively, quickly throw to Cooper Kupp in particular. So that just kind of like some weird math there, that the ball doesn't go anywhere else because he is looking at his first look because the offensive line is bad, and Cooper Kupp is, potentially a guy that can, again, see 20 targets easily because of the situation. Thank you for the comment, Derek. We're bummed out over here about Jordan Love in Packers land. But I mean, the good news is they feel confident enough to where he's not going to go on IR. They're not trading for, not trading. I don't ever think trading for Jameis Winston was on the table, but they're not signing a guy like Ryan Tannehill. So we're feeling positive here. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be, mean towards the Rams. Unfortunately, all those injuries to the offensive line are just so crazy. And when that and I hate that. But when that happens, we see just the most ridiculous amount of hyper targeting to Cooper Kupp that ever existed. But I do love Demarcus Robinson on your Rams. That is my boy. Other than that, I appreciate you all joining in. So many questions. Yet again, you guys always come through. We're never lacking for questions here on this show. But that wraps things up. Shout out to you, TikTok crowd over here with all the questions. If I missed any of your questions, feel free to go to my latest video and drop a comment there, and I will answer it for you. You can also find me on Twitter at It's Tera Time, ITSTERATIME. You can tag me there and ask me a question. YouTube, Instagram, all that good stuff. I'm everywhere. As a reminder, please make sure you're subscribed to the podcast if you're listening to the podcast. And if you're not, just go find the podcast on all platforms and subscribe anyway, because that's helpful. And make sure that you are also subscribed to Player Profiler. And if you're in the mood, make sure that you're also subscribed to me on YouTube as well. Thank you for tuning in. Good luck with your lineups. If I can answer any more questions, again, feel free to tag me, because that is literally the most important part of this show, answering your questions. So thank you so much for tuning in. I will talk to you again all next week. Good luck with your lineups. See you.